Stuff, Beth, Dr. Beth Darrow from the Conservancy. I think everybody knows Beth. She's been here 5.5 years and has, yes, we should clap. I'm clapping for that, yeah. And she has elevated what we can do with the Conservancy by a huge amount. So we're fortunate. Thank you, Beth, for talking today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks to Dick and Pat. Really enjoyed working with y'all on this effort. It's kind of hard to fit 40 years of research into 15 minutes. Chris did a great job of getting the procedure in there too. So I'm just gonna hit a little bit on reviewing some of the types of projects that we have done at the Conservancy in pretty good depth over the past 40 years. We have a huge variety. We have dozens of projects that we're involved with, including collaborative projects, as well as some that we lead. We do a lot with the village, which we'll talk about, but I'm just going to focus on a few that people are probably the most interested in, given the long history. So this diagram here it's our sea turtle nests through time. So our sea turtle protection program began in 1980. The reason that I don't have 1980 through 82 numbers on here is because we've been making an effort to actually figure out exactly how many nests there were on the Bald Head portion of our patrol area in the 80s, because we used to patrol all the way to Fort Fisher. So it turns out that figuring out how many nests that we have had on Bald Head Island over 40 years is kind of difficult to figure out. This is pre-GPS, pre-beach accesses. So with Paul's help, with our ton of interns' help, and then we had an intern in 2019 who went through all of the records and looked at handwritten notes to try to put exact locations on nests from the 1980s. So this is the closest that we can come to the pattern of sea turtle nests on Bald Head Island proper through the past 40 years. And I'm just going to use this as our little timeline as we talk about all of our different projects. I'm not really going to get into these details. This is data that we're working on now with some collaborators, and we're going to hopefully find some cool patterns through time. But one thing that I'm excited about is if you look at 2000s through today, I see a little upward, I think we're on the upswing with our sea turtle nest, so that's very exciting. Just wanted to introduce our science team. This is just who's working here now. Over the past 40 years, there have been dozens of scientists, interns, educators that have contributed to these efforts. But Paul Hilbrand's our sea turtle biologist, who's here in the back. And then Allison Polinsky is our coastal scientist, she's in the back too. And then of course, Chris, he's our head honcho scientist. So, and then we can't forget the dozens and dozens of interns who have contributed, whether independent projects or helping us with our village contract work or the sea turtle protection program. They've gone on and done great things, and it's really exciting to see what they're up to. But our science here at the Conservancy, I like to kind of separate into three main buckets. We have our sea turtle nest protection program, and then all the data collection that goes on with that through the state of North Carolina, and Paul's in charge of that program. And we work a little bit on the research side together. We have our environmental services contract with the village, which has come to prominence in the past maybe 10, 15 years. And that's a lot of what I manage. And then we have collaborative research where, again, we lead some projects, but a lot of what we do is reaching out to collaborators like the folks here who are speaking today and see if we can assist them with collecting samples for them or working together on projects. And a lot of the research that I'm going to show here may have been led by like an academic partner, but we partnered with them on it. So I'm going to focus on kind of four main areas: sea turtles, our maritime forest work, including our deer program, some water quality information, which water quality is a big link to the Cape Fear region. I'm going to talk a little bit about the future and what that might hold. So first, our sea turtle protection program. We could talk for hours and hours about the just tons of data and things that we've discovered, but I want to get back to that timeline because really the history of the Conservancy is really linked to the history of our sea turtle protection program. The sea turtle protection program actually existed before the Conservancy existed. It was run through some biologists through the state. They were trying to do aerial surveys. They would come out and do surveys maybe like twice a week. So we have the first data from 1980. And then in 1981, we had our first sea turtle lady. Did anyone know Cindy Meekins? Anyone here? Yeah, very cool. So she began relocating nests to what they call a hatchery because she was finding that so many nests were being eroded and washed away, and she wanted to protect those nests. And just by doing that and by doing predator protection cages, it made a huge difference in the amount of hatch success of the nests. Moving forward, we did have a conservancy founded in 1983, 84, and then the conservancy started taking over the program with interns. And then we worked a lot with UNCW and some other researchers to start a flipper tagging program. So once we started tagging the turtles, then we started knowing who all the turtles were. Before that, it was just like, there's a nest, there's another nest. But 1980 to 1991, now we can tell who's returning, how often they're returning, their internesting intervals, their site fidelity, and we'll start getting a lot more into detailed information about those individual moms. And that's still a lot of what we do. Our tagging efforts have gotten more and more precise. We use pit tags now, which is like your microchip that you put on your pets. And then since the mid-2000s, we've collaborated with Brian Shamblin, who does genetic tagging. And what that has shown us is how our turtles are related to turtles throughout the Atlantic, the Northern Recovery Unit. So, and then in the mid-2000s, we had an awesome intern who ended up doing her PhD. She was our shining star, Lucy Hawks. Anyone know Lucy? I've never met her. Yes. So she was here for a couple of years. She was the head of our sea turtle protection program. And then she ended up doing her PhD in England, and she applied satellite tags for the first time to our sea turtles and started understanding their migration patterns and their movements. She also looked at 24 years of nesting data. And at that time, she didn't see any trends. She said, okay, over the past 10 years, it looks like we were on a little bit of a downslope. But when she looked at the overall data set, she didn't see any trends. 2010 was our leatherback nest, which I've talked to one of the interns who was here then, a very exciting time. Maybe one day I'll get to see one. We had our Barrett Island Study Center opening. And in 2019, it was a big year. It was Paul's first year. It was our record nesting year, and it's when our nests are being attacked by coyotes. So it was a big year. I can't believe he stayed, but we're glad. And that has led into some studies looking at the effects of predator exclusion cages and trying to improve that technology to try to work with those invasive non-native coyotes who want to eat our sea turtle eggs. We've got a lot more things planned. Paul is always thinking about new research projects. Here's some of the things that I mentioned, that some of these studies were done by researchers at UNCW. Some of them were led by Conservancy personnel. And in the future, we have a lot of plans, but we definitely are planning to continue collecting the genetic tagging data. That's a program that we have to raise funds for because the University of Georgia doesn't have funds to do that. Paul has started satellite tagging turtles, and that's been really exciting to see the migration of those turtles. And then ultimately, we hope to see where they go and if there are impacts of things happening offshore on those turtle migration routes, like the effects of wind farms. And then another hopeful plan is to work with one of our collaborators who does ecotoxicology and look at taking blood samples from the turtles that we are in contact with to see if there are toxins that they're exposed to. So we have a very unique opportunity here at the Conservancy because we get to handle turtles as part of our permit, where a lot of sea turtle programs don't do that. So we get opportunities to also take samples and gain knowledge about turtles in ways that other programs can't necessarily do. So just a few of the plans. I'm sure we talked to Paul about many different. So moving on to the maritime forest, taking a big step to a different ecosystem. And Kimmy is going to get into this more, but I'm a marine scientist, and it's taken me a while. It took me a few years probably to truly appreciate the maritime forest with the spiders and mosquitoes and murkiness. But when I read this, baldhead wood is a protected maritime evergreen forest, South Atlantic subtype, has a G2 rank, is a globally imperiled community. So we have a really, really unique system here, and I'm not just talking about the Baldwin Woods Coastal Reserve, I'm talking about the forest that exists in your backyards, along roadways, that beautiful view that we see when we're driving down Federal. It is a globally imperiled ecosystem, so it's pretty special. This is still my sea turtle graph, but it's showing a little bit of the history of what we've been doing here with forest work. So since the Conservancy was founded, soon after that, deer actually were established on the island, sometime in the mid-80s. So before that, there were not white-tailed deer on the island, or maybe they came and went. But with the closing of inlets, especially the one up at Fort Fisher, it made it a lot easier for deer to come and go onto the island. And why does that matter? Because deer are herbivores, they eat plants, they like small saplings, like little live oak trees. So this is something that scientists started becoming concerned about. And actually there was a deer task force that was begun in 1999 to try to figure out the deer population is kind of exploding. Is there something that we need to do about it? The village began managing deer in 2003. And the Conservancy and the village, and there was a Friends of Deer program, worked together to implement the first deer immunocontraception program in the state of North Carolina. And that went on for about 6 years in the 2010s. Meanwhile, there was some forest data being collected, but not a whole lot. So there's one study that we refer to a lot, which is Taggart and Long, John Taggart and Zach Long, who they established plots in maritime forests. I'll show you a picture. And these are still out there. You may come across them sometimes when you're out there hiking. So these are to exclude deer. So there are paired fenced and unfenced plots. And the ones that exclude deer, if there's a lot of herbivory, that you would see a difference between those two. So if you see deer are mowing down this open land over here, and they're not getting into this one over here, and there's a lot of growth, then we would say that the herbivory or the consumption of that vegetation is having a big impact on the forest. So you can see these plots are all throughout the forest reserve. And Taggart and Long found in 2011 that there was no impact. They said, no, we can't see any difference between the fenced and unfenced plots. But they weren't very well maintained. So in 2020, we worked together with Jody Forrester to go out and sample them again and establish a new baseline. She also found no difference between the fenced and unfenced, but some of the fences were kind of like not really working to exclude deer. So our goal is to keep looking at these fenced and unfenced plots through time, maybe every 5 years or so, go out and evaluate what species are there. We can also look at other threats like storms, fragmentation, disease, to see how that's changing the forest structure. The biggest change that we're seeing so far is the loss of red bay. There is an invasive species for the red bay ambrosia beetle, which is spreading laurel wilt disease, and red bay are dying. There's no cure for it, unfortunately. So the red bay are changing over to laurel cherry. We're seeing more laurel cherry come in. Some stats from Jody's work. The height of the forest canopy here is 25.3 meters, which is about half the size of the Statue of Liberty. And at the time, the canopy openness was 26%, which is pretty high. And that was because it was right after, it was done in 2019, 2020, right after that series of hurricanes. We had Florence, Dorian. So what's going to happen is I expect that in 5 years, we're going to see that is filling in. Moving on to deer, which are inexorably linked to the forest. We've done regular spotlight surveys since 1999 to keep an eye on the deer population. And as I mentioned, the first deer immunocontraception program in the state. Here are our deer population numbers. So in the early 2000s, we were getting some really high numbers of deer. And that is when we started, the village started doing a management program and using culls to manage the populations. That's why we see a big decrease, and then they kind of spring back again because they can just, they reproduce a lot. But they managed to get the deer under control And then the immunocontraception program started in 2014, and that has also managed to kind of keep that population below the target size of 200 deer. We're keeping an eye on this every year because right now we're not doing the immunocontraception program, but it may be that we need to start again if those population numbers start coming up. This is a lot of details about, I'm just trying to show it's a complicated process to do the immunocontraception. Basically, you're capturing the deer, you're giving them an injection of a birth control drug. You have to give them a booster the next year for it to be fully effective. So it's very labor intensive and very expensive, but effective. So Micah Walker, our grad student who worked with us, found that it was 86% effective at preventing pregnancy if the deer had 2 doses. So we have given the contraceptive drug to 84 deer. Right now we have 173 deer out there. And then Allison has been working on some GIS analysis, and we're looking at the deer habitat size compared to when we originally did some of these calculations. And she found that we've actually lost about 25 hectares of deer habitat since 2019. So that could affect kind of the carrying capacity of how much having deer our island can support. So we want to continue to prioritize data collection on maritime forests. We feel it's very important. Continue collecting data on deer, do those forest plot surveys if anyone wants to volunteer to come out 2025, and then possibly restart the project. I'm going to speed through the creek water quality a little bit. We have a number of different water quality projects that we conduct. Again, kind of the history of water quality. So even back in the late 1970s, there was poor water quality in Wildwood Creek. And as Chris showed, the island was not very developed then. So the question was, why is that? And at that time they said, we think it's wildlife, we think it's raccoons and birds. Even in the mid-90s, there were studies done, like dive studies, to see if septic was leaking. And they said, no, there's no septic leaking. We still think it's raccoons and birds. So we don't really know why the water quality is not great in Baldwin Creek, other than that there's not a whole lot of exchange in that creek. So it doesn't get flushed out as much as some other places. My map didn't show up, but here are the sites that we sample. We sample these weekly. And then this is some data that we've collected since 2017. So we've done a number of different studies, but we've been consistently collecting nutrient data and fecal coliform bacteria data since 2017. And the good news is that nitrate, which is a nutrient, phosphate, which is a nutrient, and fecal coliform have all been decreasing over the past, since 2017. So water quality is improving. It's also been a number of dry years, so it could be that we're just not getting as much like runoff, but that is good news. Keeping an eye on it. In the future, I think it's really important to continue sampling water quality for everybody's health and enjoyment of the island. We have now a continuous water quality station at the mouth of the creek, and we just applied for a grant to hopefully be able to continue that. I'd also like to get more into marsh research, so looking at erosion and response to sea level rise. We're also installing living shorelines, like Chris mentioned, which hopefully should help with erosion, but also those oysters are filtering the water and will help with the water. Okay, so some big picture things. What do we not yet know? You didn't see me talking about development very much, because to be honest, we haven't really been studying development. I think Kimmy's project is the first one that we've been able to work with somebody to really help us analyze that, other than our interactions with Chris and the village. So we don't know too much about the flows of energy and nutrients between the different ecosystems on the island. We don't know the carrying capacity of the island in terms of people, in terms of animals. What are some of these tipping points for ecological change? Like what density of houses is too much in terms of people and infrastructure, but also what is it in terms of the habitats and the wildlife? We just don't know. And then I'd like to look at other islands, because I think a lot can be learned from other areas that also have maritime forests, also have beaches. and see what the similarities and differences are with the ecology. Here's a quote from Thad Wester. I never met him, but man, he had a way with words. And I still think that this is, even though it's not our mission statement anymore, I think that we all kind of keep that living in harmony with nature at the core of what we try to do with our research and our conservation efforts. All right, thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, I had a quick question about the deer and the coyotes.
Yeah.
Because when we were, if I'm not mistaken, when we were doing the community contraception, the coyotes were less present.
Right.
So, do we think that there will be less need for contraception because of the coyotes doing their own call?
Possibly. Actually, we tried to do a population survey or, like projecting how much the deer could expand without immunocontraception, and we have not seen that kind of exponential growth. So I do think that coyotes are having an effect. We have seen coyotes taking fawns. I don't think they would take a full-grown deer, but I think that they could be having somewhat of a control.
All right, one more question, then we're, yeah.
Are you looking into the effect of rising ocean levels in March?
Not right now, but that is something that we're interested in looking at. The village now has a water level sensor in the marina, and I think it'd be really interesting to pair that with studies in the marsh and see what's happening.
Yeah, definitely something we've talked about a lot, and next year, our sustainability fellow is gonna be looking at how does sea level move the marsh inland, where are there spaces available for the marsh to even migrate as the sea level rises, so 1 year from now, we'll be able to answer a little bit more of that question.